You wrote this great op-ed, I think it was in the Washington Post, saying that we can't beat China by becoming more like China. We beat them by becoming more like the U.S. Say more.
The U.S. made this terrible mistake. It thought that China was going to become more like America. And in fact, it didn't. It stayed a dictatorship. It stayed landless. That's a fair critique. But what's ironic is the U.S. is becoming more like China. We're adopting state control of the economy. We're adopting the idea of industrial policy and restricting trade. And most importantly, we are politicizing the economy.
Fareed, where does this podcast find you?
In New York.
So we were talking off mic. My book was 375th on Amazon, and then I went on Fareed Zakaria and immediately jumped to like 90th. So Fareed is a kingmaker in addition to all the other things you do. So thanks for having me on, Fareed.
It was a huge pleasure. Your segment did fantastically for us. And I do think one of the things I'm very proud of with our show is, we have pretty good numbers, but most importantly, we have an attentive audience of people who like to listen to smart people like you and buy books. I can't promise you they read the books, but they do buy the books.
Well, I mean, that's unusual. A lot of programs get smart people. Very few get people who buy books anymore. I read this crazy stat that 1% of people buy 99% of the books. Anyways, and I know you have a new book or have a book out. I wanted to kick things off. It feels as if, as disappointed as people are in Trump's administration so far, and as unpopular as he is, there's a lot of evidence showing that if the election were held again today, he would still win. And that it's difficult to find a group of people who are less popular than the current administration, but we found one, and that's Democrats. It definitely feels, and I say this as a progressive, it definitely feels we're lost in the wilderness, really looking for a North Star. And maybe they have, if the Democratic National Committee brought you in and said, what is our North Star? What do you think we need to do to find our center of gravity at the Democratic Party? What would your advice be?
It's a great question, Scott, because you really are hitting on something that's very, very important, because it's not just the Democrats. If you look around the world, the left everywhere is in ruins. Look at France, the Socialist Party of France, one of the great left of center parties in the world, all destroyed. You look in Germany, the German Social Democrats, again, one of the original great social democratic parties, in ruins. You look at Italy, the Democrats, the left of center that ran the country for most of the last 70 years, in ruins. So what is happening? Why is it that the left is facing this, this kind of collapse? Well, I mean, one of the things I try to argue in my book, The Age of Revolutions, is that we are going through a huge backlash against 30 years of globalization and technological change and cultural changes. But what's fascinating about these phenomena, and I go back in hundreds of years in history, is that when they happen, when people feel this sense of existential anxiety about the world they're in, they tend to move right culturally, not left economically. So when they feel like my world is disappearing, they search for those people who say, I'm going to make it all better. I'm going to take you back. I'm going to give you tradition and religion and the way things were. And that's what the right does. It's a politics of cultural nostalgia. The left says, we've got 3 more government programs for you. We've got free healthcare. We've got free daycare. We've got free childcare. And it turns out that people at that moment, they're not looking for another government program. They're angry. They're feeling like their world has been turned upside down. The right is much better at addressing what is fundamentally a kind of cultural anxiety than the left, which tends to always want to solve these problems by saying, hey, we're going to throw more money at you. Give you one simple example. Joe Biden spent more money on Red America than any Democrat has in the last 50 years. All his bills, infrastructure, IRA, everything was targeted almost at spending money in red counties. I think by one estimate, 80% of Biden's spending plans went to red counties. They voted more against the Democrats, more against Kamala Harris, more against the left in 2024 than they had in 2020 after $2 trillion was spent on them.
So I want to put forward a thesis, and I really am asking this for illumination, not for confirmation. But my every as a hammer, everything I see is a nail. But my thesis around this pivot from blue to red is largely explained, or at least partially explained, by the struggles of young people and specifically young men. If you look at the groups that went furthest from the left to the right, it was one, Latinos, two, people under the age of 40 who are just less wealthy than people our age and are angry about it. Maybe they're not good at math, but they can do math. And then the third group I found most interesting that pivoted hardest from blue to red were women aged 45 to 64. And my thesis is that's their mothers. And there's still a lot of women, I think, in the West who will vote for who they perceive as being in the best interest of their husbands and sons. And you don't care much about territorial sovereignty or social programs or transgender rights when your son isn't doing well. That a lot of this move towards a strong man or the chaos candidate, and Trump does represent, I call it chaos, some people would say represent change, that a lot of it can be reverse engineered to young people's struggles and specifically the struggles of young men. Where do I have that right and where do I have that wrong?
Oh, I think you're entirely right. It's the funny thing is these things all work together, right? Like economic anxiety translates into cultural anxiety, translates into a desire to kind of burn the house down. To just clarify in a way, if you look at and say to yourself, well, it's all about income inequality or something. Well, Sweden has very little income inequality, right? This is one of the countries that has the most advanced social safety nets in the world. They have a huge right-wing populism problem. If you say, well, it's because we lost our manufacturing base. Well, Germany preserved its manufacturing base. They've got a right-wing populism problem. You say it's about we haven't looked after our workers enough. France coddles its workers more than any country in the world, and they have a right-wing populism problem. So there's something going on, and you're right to focus in on this sense of helplessness. My world has disappeared. My prospects look bleak. And what happened, I think, in the phenomenon you're describing, as I see it, the women, as you say, in a sense, voted more again for nostalgia, for tradition, for return to some kind of more traditional, settled way of life. The young men was really interesting, as far as I can tell. It's young Hispanic and young Black men, as you say, moving right. What's happening there is the Democrats are saying to them, vote for us because of your identity, because of your race, your ethnicity. The Republicans are saying, vote for us because of your social and educational class. You are a non-college educated folk. And the Democrats are a party of elitists who believe in transgender rights and all this woke ideology. We're simple, traditional. We're the party of common sense. I thought one of Trump's geniuses in the last Republican convention was to put Hulk Hogan on and have him tear his shirt out. A lot of us looked at that and thought, what is this weirdness, right? What Trump was signaling to young men, particularly, I think, young non-college educated men, is the Democrats are the party of unisex bathrooms. We're the party of Hulk Hogan. Who do you feel more comfortable with? So there's a lot of that. Again, Trump knows how to play these cultural notes so much better than Democrats do. And you can see, as again, I come back to culture just because I think, it's economics translating into culture. Because if you look at pure economics, the right-wing populism in Europe, for example, it's happening in Sweden. They don't have an income inequality problem. It's happening in Germany. They don't have a loss of manufacturing-based problem, right? So there's something deeper going on here than just economics.
Support for the show comes from Adobe Express. With social media, email, and a growing variety of online ads, there are more touch points than ever between your business and its customers. Adobe Express is here to make sure your smallest touch point is as polished, impactful, and on brand as the biggest. The brand kits in Express make following design rules a breeze. Templates for flyers, banners, emails, social posts, and more have all the professional quality Adobe is known for. And generative AI that's safe for business gives everyone the ability to make images, rewrite texts, and produce effects using simple text prompts. You can create campaigns, resize ads with a click, and even translate content automatically. Work that used to take weeks now takes minutes or even seconds. Adobe Express also makes collaboration, approval, and sharing easier so any team can become a well-oiled content machine. And if you're leading your team, you can monitor it all from your admin console. That means you have one centralized place where you can ensure that every asset is right and that everyone is synced. Go from fragmented to business-friendly. Switch to the quick and easy app to create on-brand content, Adobe Express. Learn more at adobe.com/express/business. True story, I've actually used Adobe Express, and I was genuinely impressed with how easy it is to create professional content that you can immediately push out. Support for the show comes from LinkedIn. We say this all the time on our show, but it bears repeating. Running a small business isn't just a full-time job. It's about a dozen full-time jobs that you rarely, if ever, get to clock out of, at least until you get to the point where you can start hiring the dream team. And if you've made it that far, you already know there's no time to mess around. That's where LinkedIn Jobs comes in. LinkedIn makes it easy to post your job for free, share with your network, and get qualified candidates that you can manage all in one place. And LinkedIn's new AI feature can even help you write job descriptions and then quickly get it in front of the right people with deep candidate insights. And if you decide you want to go the extra mile to find the perfect candidate, LinkedIn says that promoted jobs get 3 times the number of qualified applicants. It's all these little things that let you find help fast without compromising on quality, which add up to you finally having extra time in the day for, I don't know, relaxing. Or, knowing my listeners, you'll probably use that extra time to expand your empire even further. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/prof. That's linkedin.com/prof to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Support for the show comes from Grüns. Even when you do your best to eat right, it's tough to get all the nutrition you need from diet alone. That's why you need to know about Grüns. Grüns isn't a multivitamin, a greens gummy, or a prebiotic. It's all of those things and then some at a fraction of the price. And bonus, it tastes great. All Grüns daily gummy snack packs are vegan, nut, gluten, dairy-free, with no artificial flavors or colors, and they're packed with more than 20 vitamins and minerals, made with more than 60 nutrient-dense ingredients and whole food. Grüns ingredients are backed by over 35,000 research publications, and the flavor tastes just like sweet, tart green apple candy. And for a limited time, you can try their Grüny Smith apple flavor just in time for fall. It's got all the same snackable, packable, full-body benefits you've come to expect, but this time, these taste like you're walking through an apple orchard in a cable knit sweater, warm apple cider in hand. Grab your limited edition Grüny Smith Apple Grüns available only through October. Stock up because they will sell out. Up to 52% off when you go to Grüns, GRUNS.co, and use the code PROFG. So this isn't an outrageous thesis or scenario, but when we have talk show hosts who are now the Secretary of Defense, I refuse to call it Secretary of War, I want you to imagine that Fareed gets a call and says it's time to serve the country that's been so good to you, the United States, and you're going to be Secretary of State. And the first thing I need you to do is to brief the president on the state of the world, looking at, say, different countries as stocks or as assets that have gone up in value and down in value. Where do you think the balance of power lies? Who's accreted power in the last 10 years? Who's ceded it? And what would be the 2 or 3 most important things you would recommend that the U.S. does to recapture or strengthen its position globally?
So the balance of power, I think, is pretty clear. That China has gained ground and we have lost ground. You can see this, for example, The Economist had a study of Southeast Asia. Southeast Asia, probably the most pivotal part of the world because it is at the heart of the contest in Asia, and economically, it's deeply tied to China, right? China is the dominant market. It's in many ways, they have to get on with China, and yet, in security terms, Southeast Asia has always been very close to the U.S. Singapore, Malaysia, Indonesia, Vietnam. What has happened over the last really year, but it's been a longer term trend, is they have all moved closer to China. And that is because the tariffs have have wreaked havoc on our alliances. Because, rather than building up and helping our allies, we're punishing them. Because what ends up happening is Trump uses the leverage he has to punish people. We have leverage with our allies because they're the ones we trade the most with. So they're the ones, of course, with whom we have the most trade, and they're the ones Trump says I can squeeze more. So I would say the fundamental thing that the United States needs to understand is we are in a contest for global influence, power, for technology platforms, for the future of technology with China. China is the first real peer competitor the United States has had, perhaps ever, because the Soviet Union was never really a peer competitor economically and technologically. So the question is, how do we engage in this competition? We have one great superpower, and you've talked about this a lot, Scott. You understand it very well. We have about 50 countries that are among the richest, most advanced countries in the world that want to ally with us, that believe in our values, that believe the United States is a great, kind of ringleader. If we can strengthen that alliance and create a kind of ecosystem, we can match and beat China in everything, even in rare earths, even in critical minerals, because we have Europe, we have Australia, we have Japan, we have India, we have Israel. We have this extraordinary ecosystem. You know how many treaty allies China has? One, North Korea. And let's throw in Russia as a de facto ally. So we've got 50 odd countries, and they're the richest countries in the world. And they've got these two decrepit countries, right? That should be the way we think about this. Instead, what Trump is doing, and this is really the central flaw of Trump's foreign policies, he's turned on our allies. So that the Canadians are asking themselves, how do we think about our future for the next 30 years, distancing ourselves from America? The Europeans are thinking, how do we think of our future for the next 30 years, developing independent, alternate strategies towards China, Russia, India? The Australians are worried we're going to abandon them on this nuclear submarine deal. So that's the fundamental mistake, which is to not realize the allies are the greatest force multiplier the United States has, the greatest peacetime alliance in history. Almost every other alliance in history, Scott, ends when the contest for which it was created, ends. We created an alliance system during the Cold War. We won the Cold War, and the alliance system grew rather than shrinking.
Yeah, it's just I'm reminded of what Churchill said: the only thing worse than fighting with your allies is fighting without them. I mean, it seems like the prosperity is so enormous that we decided to engage in self-sabotage. And I want to use this as a bridge. You wrote this great op-ed, I think it was in the Washington Post, saying that we can't beat China by becoming more like China. We beat them by becoming more like the U.S. Say more.
So, one of the fascinating things about the last 10 or 15 years is that people have all kind of been talking about how the U.S. made this terrible mistake. It thought that China was going to become more like America. And in fact, it didn't. It stayed a dictatorship, it stayed landless. That's a fair critique. But what's ironic is the U.S. is becoming more like China. We're adopting state control of the economy. We're adopting the idea of industrial policy and restricting trade. And most importantly, we are politicizing the economy so that the administration gets to pick who are the technology leaders, who gets special treatment. Okay, you ban chips, but if Jensen Huang comes to you in the White House and makes a case, and by the way, maybe it makes a donation to your ballroom, you will allow him to sell the chips, but you take a 15% cut. This is all entirely the opposite of the way the United States economy is meant to run. I grew up in India where that was how the economy ran. The politics was more important than economics. The market was less important as a signal setter than what was happening in the corridors of power. And when I came to America, what I loved about the United States is what the market was not run by politicians. It was run by the market, by businessmen, by entrepreneurs, by investors. And we are politicizing the economy to an extent to which it is going to breed corruption, it is going to breed inefficiency, and most importantly, we don't play this game well. That's China's game. If the game is going to be who can better absorb pain, restrict, critical minerals, put in export bans, the Chinese will beat us every time because they have no rule of law, they have no courts, they have no elections to worry about in terms of inflicting pain. Xi Jinping doesn't care if the stock market goes down 20%, right? So we're sort of weirdly playing their game. Well, what we should do is out-innovate them, out-compete them. We have all the tools at our disposal, but we're engaging, as you said, in a kind of weird self-sabotage.
So you brought up something, and I want to put forward another thesis and have you respond to it, and that is between the U.S. and Europe, about $50 trillion economy. Russia is $2 trillion. They should be, if we get into kind of a confrontation or a war, and the U.S. and Europe decide to be on one side together, you'd logically think that Russia should be a gnat running up against a windshield. It should just be a splat and over soon, and yet it's not. And my thesis is that Russia has a core competence that we don't have. While Europe has refused to put a single boot on the ground, 1 million men perish or are injured, and yet they continue to fight the war. If AWS goes out for a day in the U.S. and people lose their Netflix, they freak out here. Isn't one of the problems in going to solutions, one, do you agree with that? And two, going to solutions, quite frankly, hasn't America just become fat and happy and not used to sacrificing or believing that we can go to wars and cut taxes and that we might want to wave our hands and talk about the injustice of what's happening in Ukraine, but we aren't really willing to do what the Chinese and Russians are willing to do, and that is have a really significant sacrifice. If we become fat and happy.
Yes, in a word, I think you have it exactly right with Ukraine, which is this is an existential challenge because it's an existential challenge to the idea of a kind of liberal, rules-based world that the United States and Europe have created. Russia is trying desperately to break that world, and it's trying to break it at this point that it has enormous leverage because it is right next door to Ukraine. And as you say, because it is willing to suffer pain, and our solution to it has been, oh, let's sanction them. Putin doesn't care about sanctions. He doesn't care about the welfare of his people. If he did, he'd be running a completely different country. What he cares about is Russia's imperial power, the imperial might of the Russian state. And he's got enough petrodollars to fund that till for time immemorial. The place where he would feel the pain is on the battlefield. And that's why, to my mind, we're in this kind of crazy situation in Ukraine where we do agree for the most part it's existential. We do agree that Russia is trying to do this. We do agree that we want to win, but then we don't do what it would take to win, right? Like if you've decided you're in the fight, there are only two options. You're going to win or you're going to lose. Losing with moderation, you get no prizes. Losing with restraint, you get no prizes. So you might as well win. And if we were to give Ukraine all the weapons in the world they need, I would argue some air support or things like that, if the Europeans were to put boots on the ground, this would be over. The Russians have lost. I mean, if you think about what Russia has lost compared to, say, for example, during the Cold War, they lost, I forget the number of troops in Afghanistan, but I think it was in the range of 20,000, 25,000 or something like that. They've lost 200,000 or 300,000 in Ukraine. There may be 300,000 injured. 500,000 young men fled the country. Putin can't keep this up forever. Economically, he can because he's turned it into a fortress militarized economy. But you have mothers whose children are dying, and that is the pressure point. And with Trump, you're not quite sure why, but for some reason he's never been willing to put real pressure on Russia.
We talk a lot about the importance of the soccer mom in Wisconsin, and because of our electoral structure, there's just a small number of people who have a disproportionate amount of impact on our elections, the quote-unquote swing voter. And I would argue that the new swing voters globally that are could look east, could look west, are the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia because of their economic power, and also India. And it feels, again, and the biggest own goal in history or recent history is that we have thrust India into the arms of Xi and Putin. That image of seeing Xi, Putin, and Modi looking like they were brothers, I thought was the most chilling geopolitical image I'd seen in a while. Talk a little bit about the relationship between, do you agree? And talk about a little bit about the relationship between the U.S. and India, and what do you think India, how they perceive America and their new kind of strength in relationships, and any advice you would have for the State Department as it relates to India?
So this is a real extraordinary transformation that has taken place in the last year in India. If you polled a year ago and asked, just countries, forget about the governments, attitudes towards America, India was usually among the top three most pro-American countries in the world. The top three, top five. It was up there with Poland, Israel. And this is astonishing because India's government through the entire Cold War was siding with the Soviet Union, right? So the Indians have a very strong natural affinity and inclination towards America. They admire America. All Indian businesses admire America. Young Indians want to come to America for education. There's nothing more glamorous in India than saying that you have a degree from an American college and things like that. So there's a huge amount of cultural power and attraction that the U.S. has. It's flipped. It's flipped because of a real sense that Trump is trying systematically and consciously to screw India. India has the highest tariffs in the world now laid on it. So you look at that and you say, why are you doing this to us? And then Trump went out of his way to favor Pakistan. So there's a kind of weird element to it all. And what's strange about it is this has been one of America's great foreign policy successes, and it's totally bipartisan. So at the end of the Cold War, the United States starts to woo India to become part of the kind of American, if you will, sphere of influence, our ecosystem. It's a democracy. It's 10% of the country speaks English. It's all these connections to the West. Clinton begins it, a massively successful state visit. George Bush, probably Republican, makes the most important shift, which is he accepts that India is a nuclear power and stops sanctioning it. Obama makes the pivot to Asia, which in large part is a strengthening of the relationship with India. And Trump, in Trump 1.0, he continues that process. And again, somewhat inexplicably, he's turned on India and undone 4 administrations' work, bipartisan 25-year project of bringing India closer to the United States. And to underscore your point, Scott, there is only one country in the world that has the scale to replace China. And if you're trying to create a non-Chinese ecosystem, if you want to make massive amounts of consumer electronics or iPhones, only India has the scale to be able to do that. If you want to make massive amounts of pharmaceuticals, only India has the ability to do that. If you want to, for the next pandemic, you don't want to be reliant on China, because many of these things we're talking about are low margin goods where you need to make them in massive scale. That's not going to be done in Texas or California. That's not even going to be done in Europe. Only India can play the role of the next China with regard to that kind of manufacturing. It can be crucial in processing of critical minerals, a bit like rare earths, because India, it has lower environmental concerns. So with all that being, that's the prize, to screw it up. And the strange thing is, I still have not heard a coherent reason why this has happened. Why does India have the highest tariffs in the world? It makes no sense. The U.S. and India trade is not even that great. So you're trying to look for a reason, and unfortunately, we're living in a court. And so you're just trying to understand, was the emperor in a bad mood that day?
Support for the show comes from Vanta. As a founder, you're moving fast toward product market fit, your next round, or your first big enterprise deal. But with AI accelerating how quickly startups build and ship, your security expectations are higher earlier than ever. Getting security and compliance right can unlock growth or stall it if you wait too long. Vanta is a trust management platform that helps businesses automate security and compliance with deep integrations and automated workflows built for fast-moving teams. So whether you're a startup tackling your first SOC 2 or ISO 27001, or an enterprise managing vendor risk, Vanta's trust management platform makes it quicker, easier, and more scalable. The results? According to an IDC study, Vanta customers slash over $500,000 a year in costs. Establishing trust isn't optional. Vanta makes it automatic. Go to Vanta.com/ProfG to save $1,000 today through the Vanta for Startups program and join over 10,000 ambitious companies already scaling with Vanta. That's VANTA.com/ProfG to save $1,000 for a limited time. Support for Prop G comes from Chime. It's no secret that managing your money can be stressful. Overdraft fees, missed payments, and the constant worry about saving more can add on undue pressure when life already feels full. Chime says it can help ease that stress by giving you simple tools to take control of your finances one step at a time. With Chime, your money moves faster for you. You can open a checking account with no monthly or maintenance fees, set up direct deposit, and even get paid up to 2 days early. Plus, Chime offers fee-free overdraft coverage of up to $200. Chime says it's already spotted members more than $30 billion. And with more than 47,000 fee-free ATMs, that's more than the top 3 national banks combined, they say you'll have your money wherever you go. It's all designed to help you stress less, save more, and make your money work harder for you. You can work on your financial goals through Chime today. You can open an account in 2 minutes at chime.com/PropG. That's chime.com/PropG. Chime. Feels like progress.
Chime is a financial technology company, not a bank. Banking services and debit card provided by the Bancorp Bank N.A. or Stride Bank N.A. Members FDIC. Spot me eligibility requirements and overdraft limits apply. Timing depends on submission of payment file. Fees apply at out-of-network ATMs. Bank ranking and number of ATMs according to U.S. News and World Report 2023. Chime checking account required.
Support for the show comes from BetterHelp. With the weather getting colder, it's a lot easier to stay inside, turn on the TV, and ignore the rest of the world for a while. But when you're all alone and isolated during these short, dark days, it's very easy to get down on yourself. Human connection is important. And this November, BetterHelp wants you to reach out, make a coffee date with an old friend, write a letter to a distant family member, and take steps to connect with a licensed therapist with BetterHelp. Just fill out a short questionnaire to help identify your needs and preferences, and BetterHelp's industry-leading matching process will put you in touch with a qualified therapist. And if you aren't happy with your match, switch to a different therapist at any time from their tailored recommendations. Reaching out is one of those funny things where at first it feels like a chore, and then once you've done it, you often think to yourself, why didn't I do this sooner? This month, don't wait to reach out. Whether you're checking in on a friend or reaching out to a therapist yourself, BetterHelp makes it easier to take that first step. You can get 10% off their first month at betterhelp.com/ProfG. That's betterhelp.com/ProfG. So try and put us in the head of the current administration's decision to strike Venezuelan boats allegedly carrying drugs. Do you see this as an attempt to try and secure additional energy supplies, as performative masculinity, distraction from Epstein? I can at least make an argument for some, if not most of the things he does, even if you don't agree with them. This to me just seems such a non sequitur, an anomaly. What do you think is in the heads of Hegseth, Rubio, and Trump striking these boats?
Look, you're trying to explain something that doesn't make a lot of sense, because actually the vast majority of the drugs are not coming on Venezuelan boats. Like the stated rationale doesn't quite make sense. Maduro is a bad guy. It's a bad regime. They've done terrible things to their people. But why are we doing this? Why now? Part of it, I think, is that Hegseth and Vance and that whole core MAGA contingency really do believe that the United States has been spending its military power too much in the kind of distant corners of the world, and it should be retreating to a kind of fortress America, and that our hemisphere, it's a very 19th century kind of conception. our hemispheres where we should be primarily engaged. So okay, that means that okay, you got to find some issue or problem in in the Americas. So you look at Venezuela, they're the bad guys. Uh, I think the oil part is an important part of it. My understanding is that one of the things that the Trump administration has been trying to do with Venezuela is say to Maduro, if you will make a special deal with us on energy, we will relax you. You know, so part of this is the stick, which is meant to get Maduro to agree to do some kind of energy deal, which would mean that he would have to, in effect, cancel his energy deals with Russia and China and other players. Apparently, he has not been willing to do that, and so that this part of what's going on here. The part that's I've also heard one final part to this is that Marco Rubio has been looking for a portfolio as Secretary of State because most of what the Secretary of State does is currently being done by Trump's former real estate partner, Steve Witkoff. Steve Witkoff is the real Secretary of State. So Marco Rubio is looking for things to do. And one of them is, he's a big Venezuela hawk. He always has been, to be fair to him. So it's a strange collection of reasons. You just always wonder with this kind of thing, have they thought through the fact that, you could end up with some kind of igniting a civil war in Venezuela, right? I mean, if if some part of the regime collapses, as we've learned from Iraq and Afghanistan, it doesn't mean you get liberal democracy and your Thomas Jefferson candidate comes and takes control. What you end up with is the remnants of the old regime fight back. There's a new government in place. The place, goes through a multi-year civil war. I'm not sure that's great for the United States.
It feels as if, or again, another thesis, is that Trump is able to kind of run these red lines or color outside the lines as long as the market keeps going up. And the thesis is that what's replaced the importance or value placed on character, fidelity, patriotism, decency has been replaced with, if you make a lot of money, everything's forgiven. And as long as the NASDAQ and the Dow Jones Industrial Average are up and to the right, that whoever's in the office can pretty much do whatever they want. In America, it feels like to me has become a giant bet on AI, where almost our entire economic growth is based on investments and the market increases in value in AI. One, do you think there is something to the notion that we have a moral failing around the idolatry of the dollar? And how do we restore more substantive values in America? And two, just very curious to get your take on AI and what potential it represents to the upside and the downside.
Yeah, that's a bunch of very important questions. So on AI, look, I feel like it's above my pay grade to know whether or not when we get to AGI, it's going to be a complete transformation of the world as we know it and all. What I can say is, it's pretty clear that we are in a kind of arms race on AI, and that part of the reason these hyperscalers are spending is they don't want to let the other guy win, because it's a kind of strange situation. Not each of them has their own definition of what it means to get to general intelligence. So it's like a shifting goal. It's a vague, inchoate goal. The goalpost is your own, but you have to spend, because otherwise Google will win, or Microsoft will win, or OpenAI will win, or Anthropic will win. So they're all engaging in this crazy race. It feels to me like it's not entirely clear that people understand how you would get a return on that investment. And unlike a lot of these other booms in the past, you think of the railroad boom, the telecom boom, the infrastructure you're building is not going to last for 100 years, because 60% of the cost of building these data centers are the chips. And the chips get obsolete every 3 to 4 years. So you're going to need a massive cash infusion every 3 to 4 years. So the whole thing feels very heady, and like it could easily it seems like you could easily get up one morning and say, wait a minute, we're spending trillions and we're expecting only tens of billions of dollars of profit out of this. But it's possible that AI is so transformative that the normal rules don't apply. The most interesting thing to me about AI that you can see is that the Chinese are approaching it quite differently. They are going for not this race for AGI, they're really going for a much more targeted, applied AI. How do we transform these various industries and businesses using AI? So it's much more practical. And in one particular area, they seem to be ahead, which is they're trying to do real world AI. That is not large language models, but using robots. So, this is a point that Fei Li at Stanford, the great computer scientist, always makes, that human beings perceive the world not through language, but through their eyes, ears, and that if robots could sense the world that way, they would be incredibly powerful. And Chinese AI is very focused on trying to get these marrying robots and AI so that you can automate factories on a scale and with productivity levels that would be just mind-boggling, So it's a very practical way of approaching AI. I suspect we are ahead, but I wonder whether this Chinese approach is very ingenious in terms of being able to produce a kind of return on investment and actual transformation of processes, crucial processes within the economy. And your final point, which I just want to comment on because I really agree with it, is this question of the idolatry of money, which then makes you ignore lots of other important characteristics that we have for thousands of years thought were important, like honesty, bravery, courage, decency, kindness. I think that I saw this happen in my lifetime. We're about the same age, Scott, so I want to toss this back to you and ask if you agree. So when I came to America in the early 80s, what I was struck by was it was still a world in which, of course, businessmen were admired enormously, and people, thought that rich people were great and all that. Which, by the way, I thought was wonderful, coming from a quasi-socialist country which was India in the 70s. But there was enormous respect for novelists. People like Norman Mailer and Tom Wolfe were huge figures in the America I came to. There was enormous respect for academics, people who were philosophers, people who were humanists. Elie Wiesel, I remember, once came to college when I was there, and it was a huge event. And there was a real sense in which there was a richness of society that honored different kinds of people for different skills that they had. The 80s boom, on Wall Street began to change that. And then the tech boom just completely obliterated it. And now we only worship rich people, and we think that rich people are philosophers, are prophets. They know everything about everything. Peter Thiel is not just a good investor. He's also brilliant about theology and philosophy. And that's true of all these people. We look at what their work habits are, their study. We want to know, do they eat a banana in the morning? Because it must be that if Jeff Bezos eats a banana in the morning, that must be the path to his wealth. There's a kind of almost crazy idolatry that we're in right now.
The example that's running through my mind was Principal Euchelson. When I was in sixth grade, this big, handsome man used to drive up in his 240Z, which was the coolest car in the world, and he was a big man, and he used to work out with us and play sports with us. He was our principal, and he used to show up and talk about how wonderful our teacher was, and he was just kind, and he used to hug people. We all wanted to be this guy. We all wanted to be this man of service, of generosity, of affection. And now I think their heroes are Elon Musk. It just feels as if we have the wrong role models. It feels like the two of us, Fareed, quite frankly, we have a debt. We've recognized so much prosperity, an unfair amount of prosperity, being our age and being men in the United States. And that prosperity has not trickled down to younger generations, and young men are really struggling. What do you think we can do? What do you what do you do as a father? And what do you think we can do as a society to try and restore the same type of prosperity, opportunity, mental wellness that we have registered so much of, and that young people, specifically young men, seem to be in such short supply of?
So I think at a societal level, this is something you've talked about, but I 100% agree with it. There has been a huge transfer of wealth from the young to the old in almost every Western society, but in particular in the United States. We spend $4 for every person over 65 compared to $1 for every person under 18. And it's because insidiously, I don't think anyone consciously did this, but we know old people vote. And by the way, people under 18 don't vote at all. And people who are between 18 and 30 vote very little. So we have the whole reward system, the economic reward system of this massive, federal government, all geared towards subsidizing the rich, all geared towards subsidizing the elderly, penalizing the young. And, we have to try and change that. But at a personal level, look, it's a huge challenge. I think that we need to think more about ourselves, all of us, and I really mean all of us, and particularly parents, as role models, and ask ourselves, what is the impact we want to leave on the world? And most important in that is not what you say, it's what you do. So what I've been very conscious of is I have one son who's an amazing kid. Um, I have always tried to just show him in what I did that that I had these values that I believed in, that our friends were the kind of people who embodied those values, that the things we talked about when we honored something, when we disapproved of something, was that. And you gotta walk the walk. You can't just say it. Children are very good at picking up hypocrisy, and they will discount anything you say if your actions are not aligned with that. And so, in my own small way, I've tried to do that. But I think you're absolutely right. We talked on my show about this. One of the things Charlie Kirk got right was he understood the young men felt they needed a sense of purpose. They needed a sense of higher purpose, and he was willing to give it to them. And I don't agree with a lot of the things he believed in, but I think he got that right. He said, get out of the bars and embrace your Bibles. Be a provider. Make sure that you're kind and decent to women. There was, it's a kind of old-fashioned set of moral claims, but he was giving purpose to young men who need purpose. They need to feel that they are special and important and that they have power, but also responsibilities. So if you can do that, look, as I said, I think I lucked out with my son, who's amazing, but it's hard work and it's ongoing.
If there was one economic or social policy, magic wand test that you could immediately implement in the United States, what would it be?
Gosh, that is a great challenge. I think what I would do is in some significant way provide young people with capital. This could be a left and right policy. Provide young people with capital so they feel invested in the society. They feel invested in the success of the society. They understand how to save, make it something that incentivizes saving and things like that. We basically need to think more long term. We need to be able to find a way to understand the time horizon of markets and democracy is very short term, and the game we're in is a very long term game.
And last question here, advice to your 25-year-old self. What did you get right? What did you get wrong?
I think what I got right was that I was able to find a way to do the thing I loved in a way that was good for my career. In other words, it wasn't just that I followed my passion; it's that I found a way to tailor my passion to something where there was a career there. Like I did, I was able to say, this, if I do it this way, and if I work for these magazines, and if I go on TV, I'll be able to do the things I love and make a living doing it. That's number one. Number two, I think what I got right was focus on family and close friends. Um, really, particularly you and I are in this world, Scott, where a lot of people want to be your friend. And I have never made the mistake of thinking that because somebody wants to be my friend because I have a television show, they're really my friends. That I have a very acute sense of if all this went away, my college buddies, the people who, I've known for 30 or 40 years, they would stay with me. We would still be friends, but a lot of the glamour and a lot of the kind of celebrity friends that or the acquaintances I have, that would all go away, and that's just fine with me. I enjoy the ride, but I also know what my true north is. I think what I got wrong is I didn't do enough things when I was on the way up that were giving back, or that were even just fundamentally of interest to me. I was a little too caught up with success. And in my case, success, I don't mean financial success. I mean, just always moving up and making sure that this was a kind of career-wise the right thing to do. I think I should have done more things that were both interesting, that would have an impact on society. I should have had a broader definition of my success. In a way, I was too insecure and anxious climbing the ladder. I should have realized, you know what? You'll be fine climbing the ladder. You might as well stop and smell the roses and help a person across the street along the way. I now do it, but I didn't do it when I was in my 20s and 30s.
Yeah, you just summarized the last 30 years of my life. Stop and smell the roses and be kind and have different definitions of success. Fareed Zakaria is a journalist, author, and political commentator. He hosts Fareed Zakaria GPS on CNN and is a columnist for the Washington Post. I don't think I've said this to maybe two people. I think you are a beautiful mind. I tune in every Sunday, and you are literally one of the only shows where I will stop it, rewind it, such that I can parrot your comments because I find you're such an incisive thinker and I just enjoy you have been able to do something I'm not able to do. You are able to puncture through your emotions and the politics to just the truth. I think you're a tremendous inspiration for young men and literally a lighthouse in a storm of political anxiety and biases that it is so hard to see the forest for the trees. Very much appreciate you, appreciate your work, and appreciate you coming on.
As that wonderful Jewish saying goes, Scott, from your lips to God's ears. Thank you so much. I'm humbled, but I'll take it.
Thanks, brother.